This week on Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News.
Throughout the investigation of this case, there's been no leads, no motives for anything. It's just maddening.
Colorado cold cases leaving loved ones heartbroken and investigators stumped.
We'd even be happy to get a phone call saying, hey, I never want to see you again, but I'm okay.
We hear from families, detectives, and activists hoping for closure and justice. Welcome to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Nathan Fernando Frescas.
And I'm Micah Smith. Each week, in a partnership between Denver7 and CPR News, we have a real talk about issues impacting underrepresented people across Colorado and amplifying voices you may not always hear.
It's the thing of nightmares. A loved one, someone who's been a huge part of your life, suddenly disappears. You have no clue what happened to them. The minutes, days, and years tick by, and your deep desire to find out what happened to them only grows.
This nightmare, it's a reality for so many families of cold case victims. Officially, a cold case is an unsolved crime investigation in which all leads have been exhausted. And this week, we're talking to a detective whose career is devoted to solving these cases.
And we're also talking to an activist dedicated to bringing attention to some of the most vulnerable in this category, cold cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people.
But first, a family who, for more than 10 years, have been waiting for their loved one to come home. 16-year-old Nicole Silvers was last seen around 3:30 in the morning on April 9th, 2014. The last person to see Nicole was her sister, Jessica Silvers. And Jessica joins us now to tell us more about the case, but more importantly, Jessica, who your sister is and the impact that her disappearance has had on your entire family. So thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
What do you remember about the last time you saw your sister?
We had a really great night the last time that I saw her. I picked her up around midnight from her friend's house where she was staying, and we got some Wendy's. We drove around. We stopped at the lake near our old house and just talked. We had a great night. She seemed happier than I'd seen her in a little while, actually.
In that moment, that memory you have, do you have any idea maybe what happened?
Or what else was going on? You mentioned the happiest you've seen her in a long time.
Yeah.
What was maybe bringing her down at that point in her life?
School was bringing her down. Her relationship with my parents was a little rocky at the time, and that was hard for all of them. That's part of why she was staying at her friend's house where she went missing from. Other than that, things seemed pretty good. Her boyfriend had just gone to, forgive me, I might get the state wrong, but I think it was Michigan or Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit hard on her because he was staying out there to help his family out and wasn't going to be back for a while. One of my initial thoughts when she went missing was that maybe she was going out there to go see him. But we had police contacting him, we had his phone searched, and he actually came back to help us look for her after she went missing.
Wow. Any clue at all? Do you have any, I don't want you to speculate, but I guess after all of these years, is there anything in your heart that makes you think, maybe this could be it?
There really isn't. That's the biggest and first question that most people ask. And I honestly don't have an answer. I want to say that initially, she probably left on her own. What happened after that, I don't know. Maybe she started a new life and she's happy somewhere else. And honestly, that would be the best possible outcome. It would be hard that she doesn't want to see her family again, but I'd rather that than the alternative.
From a personal standpoint, it feels so just heart-wrenching that you have this memory of like everything was perfect. There were some down. Everyone has ups and downs, right?
Exactly.
And then something so just like, and they're gone. Mm-hmm. And they're gone. How does that feel?
It's not easy.
Yeah.
My whole family, we all blame ourselves in different ways, I think. You know, what if I could have said something different and stuff like that. Personally, I've always wondered, like, did she say something that night that I just missed? Said something about where she might have been going. Mm-hmm. So it's been really hard on all of this.
I mean, even now you're getting emotional. I mean, and rightfully so. And this is something that you're dealing with every single day. This is not just some random stranger. This is a person that you truly cared for.
Yeah.
How do you keep going? Because I know this is just emotionally wrecking you and your family, but what keeps driving you forward after all of this time, after a decade?
Hope. Yeah. That's really it. The hardest part about it is always hoping that someday we're going to see her again, and also knowing that someday we might find out that we're never going to. That's been the hardest part, but hope is what keeps us going. We all love her. We all miss her.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the people that are helping to possibly solve this case. The detectives, the police officers, the investigators, they're helping you along this way as well, right?
Yeah, they are. The detective that's on her case now, Byron Castellan, he's been fantastic. The detectives and officers before that, I was not very pleased with. As you guys said, I was the last person to see her, and not a single police officer or detective even talked to me until Byron came on the case. That just seems obscene.
Wow. Was there any explanation as to why?
No. Initially, they said she's a runaway, she'll be back. So they didn't look into it too much right away. It took us a long time to even get her on the missing kids list because they just assumed she was a runaway.
And in terms of other family or people who have missing loved ones, have you spoken with them? Are there groups that you can get together and say, I'm feeling the exact same way that you are? I mean, there must be something out there like that, yes?
I'm sure there are. To be completely honest, I haven't looked into it a whole lot. We went to a convention probably 4 or 5 years ago for families of missing kids, and we've done some of those stuff as a family, which has been really cool. We haven't really continued on with it regularly.
Sure.
But it's really nice when we get to go do that kind of thing and talk to people in similar situations.
Yeah.
Jessica, if you could say one thing to Nicole or anyone who may be responsible for her disappearance, maybe knows what happened, what would you say?
Just that we love her, we miss her. Even if she doesn't want to see us, a phone call saying, hey, I'm okay.
That would
be great.
That would be enough for you?
Yeah.
Well, Jessica Silvers, sister of Nicole Silvers, thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thank you really for having me.
Absolutely. And Jessica mentioned the detective working on the case, Byron Castellan. If you have any information, Detective Castellan would like you to give him a call. His phone number is 970-400-2827. You can also email the detective. His email is bcastellan@weldgov.com. You may be wondering how detectives even investigate cold cases when all leads have been exhausted.
Yeah, we're taking that question to Colorado Bureau of Investigation to find out more about what goes in to investigating these cold cases. Stay with us. This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Micah Smith.
And I'm Nathan Fernando Frescas. Today we're talking about cold cases, crimes or disappearances that remain unsolved. The Colorado Cold Cases Database shows dozens and dozens of names of people killed or who went missing, cases that remain unsolved.
Yeah, most of them you've never heard of. But others, they've captured worldwide attention, like JonBenet Ramsey.
Yeah, the 6-year-old girl's family reported her missing the day after Christmas in 1996 after finding a ransom note inside their Boulder home. She was later found dead inside that home, and her murder has never been solved.
But some cases that once went cold are eventually solved years or even decades later. In fact, a cold case spanning over 20 years was recently cracked by Weld County deputies thanks to genetic genealogy. They used DNA from unidentified remains found in a Weld County field in 2000 to identify the man as Christopher Case, who was last seen in Wyoming in 1998.
So, what goes into actually investigating cold cases, and how are some solved years later? To answer some of our questions is Kirby Lewis, Assistant Director of Investigations with Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Kirby, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First, CBI has a number of cold cases that it is investigating. How do you do that when all the leads are exhausted? Because it's a cold case.
Mm-hmm.
So frequently, there's not that all leads have been exhausted. It's just that nobody's been working the case. Maybe the original detective is retired. And so through that and other means, these cases go cold. But there's still information that's still available to us. So part of the process is just getting to know the case, see what's missing. Is there some testing, forensic testing that could be used or brought to bear on this, or there may be some names in the file or something else that we can kind of restart the investigation.
What advances in technology help solve these cases now compared to 10 plus years ago?
Some of them are just as simple as updates in computer technology. scanning case files, making a digital copy from like a 1970s or 1980s, even 90s cases are typically all on paper. Turning it into a digital format, we can do name searches, we can do address searches, we can just mine the data that's already there a little bit quicker. Instead of having to read thousands and thousands of pages, you can do those searches and kind of speed up the process on particular sets of information. Additionally, there's always advancements in DNA technology, as well as fingerprints. The AFIS system is updated from time to time and provides some detailed information that we wouldn't have available to us. And the same thing with DNA. We're now able to split mixtures of DNA between the victim and the suspect, potentially. We're also able to use just much smaller DNA pieces and develop full profiles from that we haven't, 10, 15 years ago.
I'm imagining, like, you see it on TV, like CSI, where there's like a closet full of boxes that go back, 50, 60, 70 years. Yeah. Is that kind of what it's like, where you're like, hey, there's a box that we haven't touched for so long. Let's take a look at it?
So right now there's about 1,400 cold case homicides in the state of Colorado and another almost 600 long-term missing persons cases. Mm-hmm. CBI does not touch all of those. We are a request agency. So while we have boxes and boxes of files on cases that we've assisted with, we may not have ever been requested to go in and be part of the lead agency in that investigation. So we may not have all the information. We may have a box with, a file folder, and when the agency requests CBI, then it's a matter of, contacting the DA's office, contacting the originating agency and say, hey, we need everything that you've got. We'll digitize it, and that's where we start.
Yeah.
And when would be a time to call CBI in, when a local agency is, thinking we might need CBI's help on this one? When does that typically happen?
I mean, it's entirely up to the agency. We have a lot of cases that we're working right now. So resources is always something that we have to consider. Manpower, we don't ever want to give anybody or another agency false hope that we can jump on this and get it done right now. Sometimes, it depends on the age and what evidence is still available on how much we can assist on that. But if there's an agency out there that wants some help, give us a call.
Yeah. Thinking about our last interview, the emotion is so raw with these families.
Yes.
It must be very difficult as an investigator to have to go into these cases and maybe not be able to bring closure to these families and helping them through that.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I met Jess 4 or 5 years ago and her family. They came to a Missing in Colorado event, and I got a chance to sit down with them, collected the information that they had and provided that to Weld County Sheriff's Office. And my heart goes out to them, right? My son is actually a victim of a shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma that's never been solved. So fortunately he survived, but that's also kind of the inner drive that I have to work with families and try and get answers for them. But it can be difficult. Cold cases are cold for a reason. They're difficult cases. And, we just want to do whatever we can. There's certainly resources out there for families, both peers and folks that have lost loved ones, but also, just some counseling or some therapy folks to talk to.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly have a level of empathy just with that personal experience there as well. On the flip side of things, though, it must be an incredible feeling to be able to finally bring that closure to a family and loved ones when a cold case is finally solved.
Yeah. It's very satisfying. We typically develop a bond with these families, and to be able to call them, it's kind of mixed emotions because, there's a realization, especially if it's a long-term missing person, that I'm sorry to inform you that your loved one's deceased, but we've been able to identify them when all other efforts have failed in the past.
Is there anything, any message that you would give to families, loved ones who are currently going through this, where they are still just waiting for your phone call or detective phone call to finally tell them what happened?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I would suggest. Reach out to somebody. Especially with the holidays, it's a very difficult time. All those family traditions that you've built over the years, they're impacted, right? And especially when you have a murdered loved one or they're a long-term missing person. I can only imagine how difficult that can be during birthdays, holidays, special times in the family's lives that they don't get to enjoy anymore, and they have so many unanswered questions. Just reach out and talk to somebody, right? Secondly, and I have failed to mention this before, but one of the technological advances is forensic investigative genetic genealogy. And where you can assist on that is there's a couple of vendors, Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch Pro. The more people we can get to submit their DNA samples into that, the more opportunities we have to compare the DNA from a crime scene or from a victim or maybe even a suspect and make that identification through that process. And so the more people that opt into sharing that information with law enforcement through those two vendors can be significant in allowing us or helping us to find family members somewhere in that family tree and move those cases forward.
All right. Kirby Lewis, Assistant Director of Investigations for CBI. Thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, hundreds of cold cases around the country involve Native American or Indigenous people, but their stories rarely make headlines.
Coming up, the unique challenges to Indigenous cases and the work being done to bring attention to them. This is Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. I'm Nathan Fernando Frescas.
And I'm Micah Smith. We want to continue our conversation on cold cases in Colorado and bring in a voice from one of the more vulnerable and marginalized communities, Indigenous people.
Yeah, the latest data from the National Crime Information Center is from 2016. It counted 5,712 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls. But according to the U.S. Department of the Interior Indian Affairs website, the National Missing and Identified Persons System only logged, get this, 116 of those cases.
So there's a clear need for more focused data, and in a way, Colorado is attempting to do that. In 2022, state lawmakers passed a law expanding the investigations of missing and murdered Indigenous people and included the creation of the Missing Indigenous Person Alert.
And since the law took effect, the state has issued more than 100 alerts. Even so, there are currently more than 25 cold cases involving Native and Indigenous people in Colorado.
Raven Payment is a member of the Colorado Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Task Force. Raven, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So how helpful has the task force and alert been?
I would say it's been incredibly helpful. One of the things that we like to focus on specifically with the Missing Indigenous Person Alert, we call it the MIPA, is that most people are found within a week of that alert going out, and it's able to then direct, we call them our relatives, but it allows us to direct our relatives to much needed resources that address vulnerabilities and risk factors so that they don't end up on the worst list, which is a potential homicide or death.
And so prior to this, they were just missing. There was no alert and things like that. They were just kind of out there, and that access to services wasn't immediately available. So it definitely sounds like this is helping.
It's absolutely helping. One of the things that we say is that Native people go missing 3 times in life. We're erased in life, we're erased in the media, and then we're erased in the data. So now when these MIPAs go out, it sends a blast to the media, which they then are able to immediately put up on the news and on their social media profiles. Similarly, it allows law enforcement, if they come in contact with this individual, to say, your family's looking for you, and then we can direct them to resources from there.
Are there specific investigative challenges that are unique to Indigenous cases? And if yes, what are they?
Absolutely. So it's a harder answer, but the tweet-sized version is that when you look at history, we have centuries of intentional policies that were created to eradicate Native people from the United States. And those policies are still very much in play. For example, the last Indian boarding school, which was meant to assimilate and abuse us into Euro-American norms, the last one closed when I was 14 years old. It was illegal for us to practice our spirituality and our culture and our customs until 1978. That's well within our lifetimes. When you add in inaccurate and racist negative stereotypes in the media and entertainment, it leads to a dehumanization of us as a people. So when we encounter law enforcement, when we encounter other people, we are more susceptible to violence because we're not seen as fully human. And then we are not investigated or shown by the media because, again, we're seen as a negative stereotype and lesser than. And that culminates in this crisis that we're seeing today.
So you say there has been a start and things are improving, but it sounds like much more work needs to be done to bring attention to missing and murdered Indigenous cases. So, I mean, what are some of the steps, the tangible steps that you say, if I had a magic wand today, this is what I need to do?
Oh, the magic wand could go on forever. However, one of the biggest things that we encounter is a lack of education about who Native people are. And that also leads to like our misidentification with the media, with law enforcement. We're often classified as Hispanic, white, something else is an interesting one that pops up sometimes in data. But there's a lack of education that we only live on a reservation, for example. And the 2 reservations in Colorado are 7 hours away from Denver, for example. 80% of Native people don't live on reservations. We have a robust Native community in Denver, for example, and we're seeing this violence and this crisis is actually coming from Denver, not on the reservations. And a lot of people don't even know that Denver was a relocation city in the 50s through the 70s for American Indians. So there's a lot of education that needs to come into play to both understand who we are as a people and how to protect us and address the crisis of violence.
Oh, and I think that's a start to my next question, a start of an answer to my next question, that is, but why is there such a disparity when it comes to cold cases in Indigenous communities?
Yeah, I would point you back to the history component and how we've been dehumanized and seen as, stereotypes a lot of times, and we still hear this from investigators sometimes, is they don't find it worthy of investigating. Or they'll say this person can't be missing because they're unhoused. And then when it comes to violence, either they don't want to direct resources to it for a subconscious bias way, or there's more negative racist stereotypes that come into play there as well.
And so your work to change this, it almost seems insurmountable, but you're doing it every single day. I mean, that must give you some hope that there is change happening in Colorado, possibly?
Absolutely. I kind of compare it to hiking. Some days it feels overwhelming because there's this giant mountain standing in front of you. But when we lobbied for Senate Bill 150 in 2022, when we look back at how far we've come, we have this missing Indigenous person alert. We have a great relationship with agencies like the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Law enforcement is undergoing training about Indigenous people in that history component. Like, all these seeds have been planted, and now we're finding, people within a week. So even though we know we have a long way to go, we've still come a long way to get where we are today. And hopefully less Native people are dying and succumbing to violence.
All right. Raven Payment is a member of the Colorado Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Task Force. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And that's this week's episode of Real Talk with Denver7 and CPR News. Every week, we have a Real Talk on issues that impact underrepresented people across Colorado who are often overlooked.
You can find all of our shows on denver7.com/realtalk or at cpr.org/realtalk. Have a great day.